Well, hello and welcome to the HSCI Hindu Chaplaincy Resource Center Speaker Series for July 26, 2024, with special guest Reverend Jurgen Schwing. My name is Zachary Ginder, and I, along with my esteemed colleagues, will be helping facilitate the conversation today. I'd also like to express an especially warm welcome to anyone joining us for the first time and those from interfaith or other diverse backgrounds. I would now like to acknowledge our board and HSCI president, Dr. Kailash Joshi-ji. And I would also like to introduce the Dean of the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute, Gaurav Rastogi-ji, to provide a brief welcome. Gaurav-ji?
Namaskar. Thank you, Zachary ji. And Jurgen ji, so good to see you. Thank you for doing this. Really an honor to have you back. Well, namaste and welcome everyone to this conversation. We're part of the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute. We're an institute, we're a service learning institute designed for teaching spiritual care and chaplaincy within the Hindu tradition. We're an online global program we've been running for 6 years. And a very important part of the institute is our relationship with the chaplains and spiritual care counselors out in the wild who are connected to us through the Hindu Chaplaincy Resource Center for the rest of their life and careers. We are here to provide you information, resources, and all the help that you need. So thank you very much, Zachary ji, for hosting us. Thank you, Jurgen ji, for doing this talk, and welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Gaurav-ji.
Yes.
To provide, Kailash-ji, would you like to say a few words?
No, I welcome our distinguished guest and for his generosity, giving his time and mind share to a very eager audience that is wanting to learn more and more about best practices and all the various perspectives in spiritual care that we'd like to bring to our institute and to our global network. So welcome and thank you again. Yes.
Thank you so much, Kailash-ji. As a side note, this is being recorded, and if you miss anything, we'll be posting it later on the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute YouTube channel. It is now my absolute pleasure to welcome our special guest, Reverend Jurgen Schwing. Jurgen Schwing has been a chaplain for over 25 years in hospitals and hospices. He's currently the director of spiritual care and runs a clinical pastoral education program at Kaiser Permanente in Walnut Creek, California. He received his academic training at Frankfurt and Heidelberg universities in Germany and at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, where he completed his Master's of Arts degree. He did his CPA supervisory training through Stanford Health and is an ACPE certified educator. He has taught as adjunct faculty at the Graduate Theological Union and has given presentations internationally, including in Germany and at the World Congress on Psychology and Spirituality in New Delhi, India. Jurgen is core faculty at the Chaplaincy Institute, an interfaith seminary and community where he teaches spiritual care and interfaith theology. Please join me in providing a warm welcome to Reverend Jurgen Schwing.
Thank you so much, Zachary. Thank you, Gaurav, for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you and the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute. Gaurav, thank you again for the tour that you organized and led for us at the temple in Livermore for our CPE group. We learned a lot about Hindu spirituality and culture. And we had some wonderful conversations with each other about spirituality and spiritual care. And it is my pleasure to talk with you all today. It's called the lecture series, but in my conversation with Zachary, he said you can either give a presentation or a lecture-like kind of presentation, or you can have a conversation with us. So what I'm looking for is more of a conversation, even though I will start somewhat with a presentational element, but will then really open it up to a conversation with everybody who is gathered here. I noticed that you spotlighted me, Zachary. Thank you so much. And, I'd also, in a way for the conversation, it might work better to just have gallery view. Is that okay with everybody? Thank you so much.
Fine.
If you'd like, I invite you to join us on camera. If it's better for you not to turn on the camera, that's okay as well. It's great to see many of your faces here. See people from the Hindu Spiritual Care Institute or the Hindu Chaplaincy Resource Center, and I see some folks from the Chaplaincy Institute. From our CPE program. I see someone from the GTU class I just taught. Thank you so much all for joining us. So the topic of my talk today is use of self, psychological and spiritual dimensions. Use of self to me is crucial for the work of the chaplain, for the work of spiritual care, caring for patients, clients in emotional and spiritual crisis. I think even though we bring external resources, we bring sacred scriptures, we bring prayers, we bring rituals, we bring connection to spiritual communities. I think all of these are important, and yet what really makes a difference, in my perspective, is the presence of the chaplain. I think the greatest gift that we bring to our patients who may be suffering from serious illness or even maybe facing their death is the open heart and the fullness of being and presence that we can bring to them as a fellow journeyer on this journey of life. And I'd like to unpack that a little bit, what I mean by that use of self, who we are, the fullness and wholeness of our being, encountering one human being to another human being at the existential level, the dimension of our shared humanity, who all of us are born into this life, live a journey in search of meaning and happiness, and all of us are mortal. And all of us live with that knowledge in our bones, that we're not here to stay forever, but that we are here to share this journey for a while, encounter other human beings, experience the preciousness of human relationships, experience the preciousness of living life in this world, of this present moment, the preciousness of us being together right now, even across the Zoom platform, and yet we see each other and connect with one another. So the use of self in chaplaincy is my topic. I want to say right from the beginning what the main point of my presentation is and the conversation that I am seeking. Use of self is a well-known term in the world of chaplaincy and chaplaincy education. It's part of the training of the education of a professional chaplain to not only develop awareness of other religions and their scriptures and their prayers, of other cultures, but it's really to develop self-awareness of who we are as human beings. My perception is that the field of chaplaincy has developed some theory and practices for understanding use of self on the psychological level quite well. And I am curious about the use of self on the spiritual level, the spiritual dimension of our being human. When you study chaplaincy, either in an academic setting or in clinical training in CPE, clinical pastoral education, You learn psychological theories, and I'm going to present some of those in a moment. You learn about developing psychological self-awareness. You also learn theological reflection in a way, but I'm not so sure that in the world of chaplaincy training, we really have entered much into exploring the deeper dimension of our humanity that I would call the truly spiritual or contemplative dimension of the self. I look at the human personality as two concentric circles. The outer circle is our psychological being, our emotional lives, our thoughts, our ideas, our ways of making meaning, our physical being, body, emotion, and mind. And we explore that in CPE quite well. We also do theological reflection, but I think we do theological reflection from that level of the outer circle. It's usually mental. It's usually a practice of the psychological part of who we are. Even if we say prayers, for example, or read scriptures, we engage it from our psychological part of our being. And I'm curious what it would look like to develop a truly contemplative chaplaincy of having practitioners of meditation or contemplative prayer practices, long-term practice over years and maybe of decades, who have developed the dimension within ourselves that is beyond thoughts and feelings and imagination, that is the silence of the transcendent being. What if we brought to the reflection and practice of chaplaincy what it would be like if we brought long-term contemplative practice and awareness of the inner concentric circle, which is deeper than the psychological self. The large S self rather than the small S self. The contemplative self, the silence, the part in us that connects us to the divine. If we use Hindu language, the Atman that is one with Brahman. If we use Christian language, St. Paul says it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. What if we were to engage being a chaplain from the Christ within, from the Buddha nature, from the large as self, the Atman that is one with Brahman? I'm looking for a conversation about that. People up for that? Yeah, see some head nodding. So I have a little presentation, but I'd like to start with a story, a case, so that you can sort of like just get a sense of what it's like when I offer chaplaincy. And this is the case of a patient I will call Dorothy, not her real name. She was in her mid-80s and was admitted to our hospice program with an advanced terminal cancer diagnosis. Dorothy had cancer before, about 10 years or a decade or so before I met her, but it was treated, was resolved. She was cancer-free for a while, but the cancer had come back, and she followed the advice of her physicians to enter the hospice program because they realized that they could no longer successfully treat the cancer, but they recommended that she focus on quality of life which hospice could provide. She could be in her own home rather than in a hospital. She could have services come to her, nurses, social worker, and a chaplain, and help her focus on living the life that the time that she still has, to the fullest, and in a way that she could choose to make it the best and most meaningful for herself. To be honest, Dorothy wasn't so sure about whether she wanted a chaplain. She kind of like trusted the advice of her nurse, who said, I think you should meet our chaplain. He might be able to be useful to you as well. She was a little worried about a chaplain coming and maybe imposing religion in a way that would make her feel uncomfortable. But the nurse put her at ease, and she said, "Our chaplain Jurgen, he'll come, and he's a pretty nice guy. He'll talk to you, he'll get to know you, and he will support you based on who you are and what your questions are and what you're wrestling with. And he will see how he can support you." And when I had my first meeting at Dorothy's home, she didn't meet with me by herself, but she had her husband with her and 2 adult daughters. And she later admitted to me and shared with me that she had sort of like created a safe word with her adult daughters, that if she felt uncomfortable, she didn't like meeting the chaplain, she would just use the safe word and they would find a way to escort me out. Because she was really like testing whether that would be something she wanted. Fortunately, it went quite well. She did interrogate me a little bit. She asked me a lot of questions about who I was, what a chaplain is, how this works, what I could do for her. And I think whatever I said may have been satisfactory for her. And she allowed me to get to know her and build some trust with her and get to know her a little better. And then eventually she was allowing herself to become a little more vulnerable and tell me what she was struggling with. And she said, "I know I'm coming to the end of my life. The doctors have been very clear, and I know why I am on hospice. And I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to approach knowing that I'm dying. And I don't even know what it is I need to learn or do or say. But I know that I need some help because I've never been here before. And I know I want to somehow die with dignity. But I don't even know what that means. But can you help me with that? Does that make some sense to you at all?" And I said, "Oh, Dorothy, thank you so much for letting me know this. And I hear your struggle with this. You're asking, you've been told you're at the end of your life and you're approaching the end, and you're not sure what that will be like and what to do. My own thoughts on this are, in our society, we have not done a good job helping people prepare for dying. We help people prepare for getting married. There's websites, there is magazines, there is counselors that you can buy advice. You can learn how to apply for college. There's finance counselors, there's college counselors, there's all kinds of people who help you with these life transitions. But there is this void about, well, what is it actually like to die? What do I do? What will this be like? How do I prepare? How do I best approach this? So I said to Dorothy, I'm not going to have some pat answers. I'm not going to have a curriculum for you that I'm just going to give you. But I have some thoughts and ideas from having journeyed with other folks. And I promise I'd be happy to simply be with you and explore these questions together. And I'll be honest with you, and I'll share what I know, and I'll say what I don't know. And I'm really curious about what this is like for you, and I'm curious to get to know you. And she said, that sounds great. I'd love to meet with you. Why don't you come by, again in a week or so? And so over time, we built some rapport, and she started telling me a little bit about her life. I asked her what in the past had helped her when she had difficult experiences in her life to find comfort or hope or support. And she said, well, it's not church or faith so much anymore. I grew up Episcopalian when I was little, but when I became a young adult, I kind of liked the ritual, but the dogma and the doctrines that didn't make sense to me. And I really haven't been in a church in a long time. But now that I'm approaching the end of my life, I'm wondering whether there is some reality, some spirit, some higher power, something bigger than myself that could maybe help me. But I don't even know how I would approach that. And I wouldn't want to go back to church in the traditional way. And I said, that sounds great. I love your curiosity, and I'm a spiritual seeker myself. So let's explore this together. One thing I noticed when I came to her home is that outside her home at the front door, she had like a big round rock that said Dorothy and Henry, 50 years of marriage. And I thought there must be a story there somewhere. There is some deep love probably there somewhere that made her put this right up front there to her door. And I thought maybe that could be a starting point for us to start looking for some kind of spiritual reality, some kind of love with a large letter L. And I said to Dorothy, I noticed this rock outside your door. So this was a while ago, but it's one of my favorite stories to tell. But it was when I was just about to get married myself. So I said to Dorothy, look, I am about to get married. And you have made marriage work for 50 years. What's the secret? Can you tell me a little bit about how this is working for you? And she lit up. She said, oh, yes, I'm happy to tell you what has worked for me. And so we had several sessions where she was sort of like teaching me about how love has worked for her. She said, first, never take love for granted. I tell my husband, Henry, that I love him every day. And I tell my adult children and my grandchildren that I love them. Second, she says, the small things are really important in love, the everyday things. We were sitting in her living room and she said, my back is a little bit sore. Would you mind handing me the pillow next to you? And I handed her the pillow and we continued our conversation. And then she said, I told you the small things matter. It would have been nice if you hadn't just handed me the pillow, but if you had stood up and put the pillow behind my back and made sure that I was comfortable. That's what love is about. She said, never neglect the physical aspect of love. I'm a real snuggler, and Henry loves that. And then she said, it's really important to express your love in creative ways. And she shared with me poems that she had written for her husband, love poems, but also poems that she had written for her adult daughters when they turned 21. She showed me artwork that she had created. And I became aware of how spirit in the broader sense, not necessarily the Christian God, but spirit in the broader sense, had been, I think, active in her life through the love that she shared and how she lived it, and through the creativity of her poetry and her art. And I shared that with her. I said, Dorothy, I think you were looking for something bigger than yourself. I wonder whether there is something bigger that has been working through you, that has given you this wisdom about how to love, that has given you this artistic creation or expression. She said, I had thought about it that way, but it does feel like it wasn't something that I was just doing. It's something that came through me. So that opened a little bit of a window to a dimension of transcendence for her. And then she told me a story, a bit of a funny story of how her and her husband Henry's love song came into their lives. The love song was the song Tenderly. I don't know whether some people here may know that. And she said at first it was actually like an annoying story. They had stayed somewhere overnight where they rented a room, and it was above a bar. And below in the bar, they were playing this song Tenderly over and over again, and kind of like had been a little annoying for them because they wanted to go to sleep. But over time, it gained some meaning for them, and it became their love song. And as we were exploring what gave her life meaning, at one point I asked whether she was interested in exploring creating a memorial service while she was still alive. And she said that would be a fantastic idea. I'd love to be able to create something that will bring comfort to my family when my time comes to leave. And we created a memorial service where she picked the poetry, she picked the songs, she picked readings, and she assigned them in very special ways to her husband, to her adult daughters, to her grandkids. And I think that was another expression of her love and spirituality. I think through these conversations, she started to appreciate the presence of spirit in her life in a new way. At one point, she wanted to explore this a little bit more in a traditional way, and wondered whether we could say a prayer together, not in the traditional Christian liturgical way, but in a way that would open her to the presence of this divine transcendent dimension that she was hoping to reach out to and find some peace from as she was approaching the end of her life. So we said a few prayers together in very kind of like curious, improvised ways, which helped her connect to this dimension of spirit. And I'll close this story by telling you about my last visit that I had with Dorothy, when she had come really at the end of her life. I made one final visit when she was already semi-unconscious in a darkened room in a hospice bed in her home, and her husband Henry was there. And the daughters welcomed me, and then showed me the door to the back bedroom where Henry and Dorothy were, and I joined them. Dorothy, like I said, was semi-comatose, not alert, no, not at least talking. And Henry was there at her side, just sitting vigil. And they were a little distressed because Dorothy, her limbs were tremoring a little bit. Her eyelids were fluttering a little bit. They weren't so sure whether maybe she was a little bit uncomfortable. And they had already shared with the nurse and the doctors. Nothing that they tried had helped. You know, she had these tremors and this fluttering. And I just sat with Henry and Dorothy in silence for a while. We breathed together. Henry and I talked a little bit, remembered the conversations that we'd had with Dorothy. And then Henry asked me to say a prayer. So I said a prayer using the metaphor of tenderly, of the love song that they had shared, to guide this prayer. I said, Holy One, we give thanks for this time together and for your presence with us. We give thanks for Dorothy and her life and the tender love that she has experienced, that she has given and received. We give thanks for the tender love that she had shared with her husband, Henry, for over 50 years. For the tender love that she has experienced as she gave birth to her daughters and raised them into the adults that they're now. The tender relationships she has with her grandchildren. We ask that you prepare for her a place in your heavenly kingdom, that you will tenderly take her when her time comes, that she may be at peace, and that she may know that she has loved well and lived well and loved tenderly. Amen. And we sat in silence for a little bit more. And Dorothy seemed to become quite peaceful. Her tremors calmed, and her body became still. I said my goodbyes to her and to Henry and went outside in the room. There was another funny moment where the daughter said, "Oh, that was such a beautiful prayer." And I said, "How did you hear the prayer? You were outside the room." And said, "Oh yeah, the baby monitor was on inside." So they were listening to the whole prayer. And they told me later that Dorothy passed away shortly thereafter, I think another day or so, and her body had become completely still and at peace. And she passed away peacefully. And we held the memorial service that Dorothy had planned, and it was a big celebration of life for her. And I'll leave it at that for the story. And I just, before I go into a little bit more of the presentation, would love to invite any reactions as you hear the story, thoughts, questions, observations, noticings as you hear this.
So, Jurgen ji, namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste. My name is Mangala. I'm with the HCRC.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a chaplain, but I am what you would call a compassionate presence. I do, sit with people, try to help them during their hours of need. So very similar to Dorothy's case, I have seen a few. And one particular one always, stands in my mind. This lady, again, in a hospice situation, I think something that she was extremely afraid of was that all her life, she had worked, she had raised her children, pursued a career and all this stuff. And her thing was, I never had the chance to build a connection with God or a higher self. So she was like, I did things superficially. I used to go to temple and even, there was an occasion and stuff, but on a daily basis, I never had a routine to connect with the higher self. So what's going to happen to me? Am I going to get, punished or, that was her biggest fear, not knowing what is going to happen to her and whether not building a connection or what she thought was a substantial connection with God was something that she was going to be punished for. So it was an interesting conversation. So my take on it all I could do was, give her my take on it to say, hey, you were a good mother. And as an employee, you did everything that your employer asked you for. You were a good wife and a good neighbor, a good friend. You have done a lot of good things in life. So building a connection with God doesn't have to be that I need to be in church every Sunday at this hour, type of thing. So I said, no need to be afraid, because, in Hinduism, we have this word called dharma. You do your dharma. You were put on this earth to do certain things. So you played all the roles that were assigned to you as a sister, daughter, mother, neighbor, friend, whatever. So all you can do is take comfort in the fact that you carried yourself well. I just wanted to see, if you ever had any situation like that, and what would you say to a person like that?
Oh, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being such a compassionate presence to this patient. Yeah, I think I've experienced that a lot too. Even people who don't necessarily have had a active religious life, often at the end of life will ask those questions about, is there a higher power? Is there a God? Is there a transcendent dimension? And how can I connect to that? Sometimes people, even if they haven't been exposed to particular teachings, pick it up from the culture. There's fear of like, well, there's some kind of a punishment, or there's some kind of, something coming my way. And to help people find a connection to a loving and forgiving and embracing divinity, to put them at ease, either through prayer or ritual, or reminding them that they've lived their dharma like you helped her, I think can be of great comfort to someone. So thank you for sharing that story and for what you've done for her.
So can I add something here?
Yes, please.
I'm in a hospital lobby right now serving a 28-year-old couple who met with an accident driving from Niagara Falls to Pennsylvania with a Hindu couple with brain bleed and a lot of fractures. So then maybe I really wanted to get onto this call. I'm 4-unit CPE trained chaplain in Rochester, New York. My name is Sanjay. Two things which I want to really share, which made a difference in my learning curve, and I may be speaking to the choir right now, is the power of silence. I have been asked, and I might have seen 99% American patients and probably 1% Hindus. But when I have been asked, where is God? Or people have questioned their relationship, I've tried to be very non-judgmental, and I've partnered with them and counter-questioned them, because they tell me, are you a pastor or a deacon? And when I'm silent, after a minute, I say, I'm a Hindu chaplain. Oh, okay. And as they get friendly over 3 or 4 further meetings and conversations, when they've asked me, where is God at this time when I'm having this 3rd abortion or the 4th surgery, I've tried to just politely tell them, was God ever with you? What do you feel? What is your opinion? Because I personally have never seen God. So for me to tell them, here is Jesus and that is Hanuman Chalisa and this is my dharma, I mean, never bring that up. And I found it just to resolve, and they remember, oh yeah, I know he was with me, but not at this time. So I appreciate you bringing about that power of silence and power of bringing your own self. And sometimes it is the counter-transference that comes very elaborately into your play, is when you see a patient, you look at her and you say, this looks like my dad who passed away, right? And you bring that, traditionally, I never brought it in, but then I started bringing it in a way that well, this happened to me, and this person is facing a similar trauma. So I would say it's very important to, as you said, the power of presence and just being there. And many a times I've been told, hey, they see this big badge of a chaplain and they say, no, we don't need a chaplain. We don't, because they feel that this is the end of life, which is really not the case. So I just wanted to share that with this esteemed audience at this point in time. And thank you very much for this lovely learning.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you, Mangala, earlier too. And Sanjay, I think this is a good segue to go into the presentation a little bit that I've prepared. Thank you for reminding us about the power of silence and how the silence can then empower whatever it is that we say or do, how it comes through in the subtlety of the voice, in the subtlety of the connection that we have with the patient. I think, don't underestimate the power of connection to spirit through silence and letting it then inform and show up in the way in which we relate to the patient. And I love what you said about transference and countertransference, because that's a big part of what we learn as chaplains, to become aware of our unresolved business so that we don't unconsciously impose it on others. And that is a good segue for the presentation, I believe. So let me see whether I can share my screen. Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes.
Thank you. So
You're not in
as I-
presentation mode though, Jurgen.
all right. Let me move that a little bit over here. Slideshow. Okay. Presentation mode now?
Looks great. Thank you.
Okay. So I described that earlier. I think of the human person as having an outer circle of the psychological self with a small s, and a deeper dimension of a large self S of the spirit within. And I think a lot of chaplaincy training does a really good job helping us with developing self-awareness of the small s self, the psychological dimension. Learning to become aware of who we are, what our strengths and areas of growth are, what countertransference we may have. But I think chaplaincy training does not do as good a job helping us connect with a deeper spiritual dimension. Especially the way chaplaincy is going right now. I think as it's trying to become more evidence-based and research-informed, which in itself I think is a good thing, but it tends to orient us to what's measurable, to orient us to the external aspects of our work. And I am really interested in highlighting the dimension of depth in what it is that chaplains do, because I think that's a lot where the power lies, where the healing comes from. So I'm going to share just briefly a little bit what we do know about the external dimension, the psychological dimension, in helping people when dealing with death anxiety. Irvin Yalom, some of you may have heard his name, is an existential psychotherapist that many chaplains have been studying, because he helps us to understand the existential dimension, especially the dimension of mortality, of who we are as time-limited human beings. He has helped many of his clients and patients overcoming the fear of death. And one of his big teachings is that what is most effective is to help our patients who experience death anxiety to explore what brings them meaning and to do it in a particular type of relationship, namely one that is deeply connected, that is vulnerable, that's genuine, that is vulnerable and transparent, that doesn't hide behind a facade of expertise, but that meets the other human being in their humanity, as I try to do with Dorothy. And then I try to not impose meaning for her by giving her a curriculum or a scripture or some kind of like an external teaching, but I helped her find and explore her own meaning. It is the synergy of ideas, or we could say meaning making plus relationship, that creates real therapeutic power. Ideas will be effective only when the therapeutic relationship is solid. So we learn a lot about that in clinical pastoral education. Learning to use ourselves to truly connect with the patients we serve. The power of connection is the most important thing in helping people overcome their fear of death. The antidote to much anguish, Irvin Yalom says, is sheer connectedness. I strive for connectedness above all. How do we do that? By developing these qualities in ourselves as chaplains or spiritual caregivers. And they're originally based off the teachings of Carl Rogers, but have a particular emphasis by Irvin Yalom. He says we need to be genuine. We don't hide. We don't come with a religious airs or affectations or privilege or power. We meet them as human beings. We offer unconditional positive regard. Psychological language for maybe saying we meet them with love. And we develop the skill of empathy, which really means learning to understand and listen to and enter our patients' experience and their inner lives. That's step one, to meet them where they are, to connect with them. And step two is to communicate to them, to let them know that we are with them, that we are touched by what they experience, that we can relate to what they go through. Facilitating connectedness involves removing barriers. As a chaplain, I don't wear any religious garb. I don't have diplomas or, no pretense. There's no hiding involved. It means meeting them as a human being, one to another. Again, the psychological dimension, we're now talking about the outer circle. CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, usually does a good job teaching chaplains to develop an existential sensibility, which really means learning to meet our patients at the level of their humanity, at the existential level. We don't come in, have abstract discussions about God simply because it's an interesting philosophical subject. We don't come in just reading scriptures to them because we have a need to portray how religious we are. No, we meet our patients at the existential level in their fear of death and their questioning about how do I do this now that I know I'm approaching the end of life, but I don't have much time left. I don't know how to do that. You meet them with our humanity and our humanness. We meet them in our own vulnerability. I did that a little bit with Dorothy when I said, I'm about to get married. I'm a little nervous. What can you teach me about what you've learned about love? So I met some of her vulnerability with a little bit of my own. Working in the here and now is really helpful for chaplains because there's a power in meeting a human being in the present moment, rather than just sharing stories from then and there. We meet them here and now. And we use some level of self-disclosure, even though we need to be careful. We're not going to make the conversation about us. But in the story, you notice that I did a little bit of self-disclosure for the sake of helping her feel more connected to me, or helping her share her story so that she can claim her own meaning that she has discovered in her own life. So we're still in this outer circle of what chaplains already learn quite well about how to connect with patients by using our own emotional selves. We practice self-disclosure, but not indiscriminately, but in the service of the patient. I never tire of telling student therapists, Yalom says, and we could say the same about chaplains, that their most vital instrument is their own self. But what he's talking about here is the psychological self. And he says the instrument must be finely honed. We need to become aware of our biases, of our preferences, so that we don't impose them on our patients, for example. Therapists must have self-knowledge. They must learn to trust their own observations. They must relate to their clients in a caring and professional manner. Therapists should have therapy themselves, Irvin Yalom says. And I think for chaplains, it means we should have some kind of self-awareness practice like clinical pastoral education. And I share one more slide about this outer dimension, the work of Pamela Cooper White in her book, Shared Wisdom, the use of self in pastoral care. It's a wonderful book. I love it. I teach it in my CPE courses, where students learn this relational model of spiritual assessment. Cooper White says, assessment always needs to start with self-care. Because when I come to a visit with my patient and I am stressed out, I'm not going to be able to be present with them very well. We need to practice self-care so that we can be present. Then we need to learn in CPE, clinical pastoral education, to become aware of our own countertransference dynamics. And it's different for each of us. Some of us are really comfortable with patients who are vulnerable, but we have a hard time being around anger because of maybe unresolved, painful experiences with anger in ourselves. So when we meet an angry patient and we haven't looked at this, we may not be very effective in meeting them, in holding them in their anger in a non-reactive way. So that's why we need to do this work, the psychological work that we do in CPE of exploring our own countertransference, so that we don't bring it unconsciously to our patients. Then we do an initial assessment, and then we do something that she calls totalist countertransference, which may be a newer term. It's very powerful in what she teaches us about listening to our own bodies when we also listen to the patient. She teaches us sort of like to develop a split screen of listening to the patient and what they're saying, but also listening to the emotional reactions that we have inside. Because there may be pre-conscious communications that the patient sends out without overtly using their words to send this message. But if we are attuned to the intersubjective space, if we're attuned to the patient's emotions, to the images and metaphors that come up as we listen to them, to the energies, the subtle energies that exist in the space between us that we have created, then this can inform our assessment as well. So I'm going through this an overview form here. You would learn that obviously, and some of you have in CPE more deeply. And then her final dimension is what she calls theological reflection. After we have listened to a patient, she says, free associate. What spiritual images, metaphors, songs, scriptures, prayers arise for you in your own mind that could guide you in caring for this patient? My point here, however, is that this theological reflection still happens on the level of the psychological self, of the outer concentric circle. What if in the training for chaplaincy we truly initiated a contemplative dimension? What if chaplains actually started to either bring in the long-term contemplative or meditation practice that they've already been having, or start one, and what that can open up inside of us beyond and deeper than the psychological dimension. So I have a couple of quotes. I think may have been in the introduction. I'm a contemplative Christian. I'm ordained a Christian minister, but I really am a very interfaith person. I'm also a student of Sri Aurobindo and his integral yoga. And I love this quote from Sri Aurobindo about his teaching, when he says that behind the appearances of the universe, there's the reality of a being and a consciousness, a self of all things, one and eternal. All beings are united in that one self and spirit, but divided by a certain separativity of consciousness and ignorance of their true self, we should say large S self here, and a reality in the mind, life, and body. It is possible by a certain psychological discipline, namely yoga, or for him it would be integral yoga, to remove this veil of separative consciousness and become aware of the true self, the divinity within us and all. So what if, as chaplains, we engaged in this practice and became aware of the true self, the divinity within us and all? And not that we need to become fully enlightened before we can be contemplative chaplains, but what if we developed this practice and deepened our awareness of the divinity within us and all? The silence, the dimension of the formless beyond our thoughts and feelings and even prayers and scriptures. What if we rested in being, large capital B, in being, in Satchidananda, in the transcendent source from which we come? Not that we need to overtly teach that to our patients, but in our regular chaplain activities, what if we were informed by this subtle dimension? What if we brought it into being as we listen, as we speak, as we pray, as we share sacred readings? Or here's a reading from Thomas Keating, the Roman Catholic priest who developed the practice of centering prayer, which is one of my practices that I do. And he talks about the inward journey to our true self is the way to divine love. The growing awareness of our true self, large as self, not just our psychological self, but the divine within, the Christ within, along with deep sense of spiritual peace and joy, which flow from this experience, balances the psychic pain of the disintegration and the dying of the false self. As the motivating power of the false self diminishes, our true self builds a new self with a motivating force of divine love. What if the CPE, the chaplaincy training process, engaged people not just in developing an understanding of their transference and countertransference, but help them understand what this process is like of dying to the false self and awakening to the true self, and how that could then empower the dimension of spirituality in all that we do as chaplains. That's what I'm curious about. And that I'm developing in my CPE chaplaincy training, and that I wanted to bring to our awareness today as we speak with one another. And I notice we're at time, so I don't know, Zachary, if we have a moment to just get a couple reactions from folks, or whether we need to close. Either way is okay with me.
Thank you, Jurgen G. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories about Dorothy and your own personal experience. We do have a few minutes. We're not on a strict time limit here. It's up to the group. I can stop the recording, or for an informal chat with Jurgen G, or we can continue to record. What's the preference? Perhaps to encourage some more discussion, I'll stop the recording now, and we'll move to informal if that's acceptable.
Sounds good to me.
Great.
Thank you.